getting different perspectives, different kinds of background information, because it's for a European audience very important to first establish some facts before being able to discuss certain issues. And once again, thank you to the organizers for this.
Thank you.
I think perhaps it would be good to, I really think the revolution in Rojava, in order to succeed, it has to be criticized, and you have done that. And when I was in Rojava, the people in the governance, and not just in the governance, in all spheres of life, they kept saying, we want people to critique us, we want to benefit from the experiences of similar revolutions in other contexts. So, for example, some have compared the autonomous caracoles in Chiapas, the Zapatista movement, to Rojava, and so on. So it's very interesting to see these kinds of developments. However, I think I would like to criticize you, if you allow me. Yeah, because I think it's important to exchange information and thoughts. I think what I've observed among some leftist circles as well, who have taken a critical approach towards Rojava, is the terms of criticizing this specific context by projecting, through European-centric lenses, basically. So, for example, you have mentioned abortion or contraception. Well, these are things, and you're right to criticize that these are very important issues. They're core issues of women's liberation, but these are things that have been achieved in Europe over decades or centuries in advanced capitalist countries, not in the midst of ISIS attacks, embargo, and so on. So the Kurdish people in Syria, they were denied their existence. Any political representation was oppressed. The people were abducted in 2004, some of them are still missing. So in these conditions, in the conditions of the Middle East, a very feudal, patriarchal, and intentionally underdeveloped region, we now have women fighting against ISIS. We now have women in communes taking part in the economy and so on. And as Anya said, revolution does not happen overnight. She said when she was younger, she thought revolution happens one day. But the real work, the real thing that makes a revolution is the social transformation. And it's very hard to overcome 5,000 years of patriarchy. But I think the women are doing quite a good job so far. The issue here is, it doesn't matter so much, I think, how many communes exist, how many councils exist, what are the exact election mechanisms. What matters much more is what does that mean in a system like Syria, in which there was one ethnicity, one language, one state, that now people work together with Assyrians, with Kurds, with Arabs, of different ethnic, religious, linguistic groups, and in such a feminist way is absolutely remarkable. And this in itself, just thinking about this, in spite of attacks by the regime, attacks by the Turkish army, international marginalization, the embargo, and so on, this is absolutely, given these conditions, and this is what women in the West have achieved in much more privileged ways in not just 2-3 years, but in decades. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind. It does not mean that we need to accept things as they are, but the women don't. For example, the deputy foreign minister of Tuesday Council told me, as you said as well, sexual violence, especially domestic violence, seems to increase. But this could mean, for example, the men are reacting against this strengthening of the women, and they do not accept that. But in spite of that, the women keep fighting. And in spite of that, slowly the mentality is changing. But at the same time, this could also mean that women are now brave enough to report on these things. So we need to interpret these things correctly. And the women are so incredibly self-critical. The the whole system in Rojava is so incredibly self-critical, but they also criticize people for criticizing them without giving them constructive critique. Nobody, one woman, the same woman actually, she said, we want to benefit from the experiences of others, but nobody actually came and gave us such a perspective so far. Instead, what I've also observed online is, for example, people trying to impose very old and sometimes outdated and in a dogmatic way ideologies on Rojava, as if this was Europe, or as if these ideologies have to be right. I'm going to keep it short. For example, people keep calling revolution in Rojava anarchist, and in many ways, this idea of the state is rejected, but people would be less disappointed if they would stop calling the revolution in Rojava anarchist if nobody there calls it anarchist. So it's quite strange to see how certain ideologies pre-made are imposed on Rojava, but it's so context related, and it's very important to keep that in mind. And also, when it comes to personality code, I think this is one of the biggest, this is also, it derives from a certain European experience, of course, which has to be criticized, and we always need to criticize authority and hegemony and domination. But what's specific about Öcalan, if people actually read what he says, is that he never himself advocates it. People simply love him. This is one thing, and you have to ask yourself why. Normally, dictators are loved because they establish some kind of cult around themselves, and there's some kind of mystified thing about them. But if you look at what Öcalan has said, especially with regards to women's liberation, to different kinds of approaches towards politics, his philosophical stances, these are very sophisticated things, and one of the main tools that he uses is to give people the tools so that they can organize themselves. One woman said from the Yektiasa, the Women's Umbrella Organization, one of our delegates asked, so what do you do when people simply don't accept women's liberation? What if you go to an Arab neighborhood and they say, no, we don't like this? This was just somebody asked that kind of question. And she said, our project is not about telling people what to do. We want to give people the tools, the mechanisms, and the education that they can organize themselves. And I think this is a very key difference. It's not about imposing something on others, it's giving them the opportunity so that they can establish themselves. So, as I said, and this is not necessarily directed to what Nina said, but just generally an observation. When we criticize Rojava, we must criticize it in this context, and also if we really want this to succeed, we need to give constructive critique and not just observe and say this is how it is, and this just happened 2-3 years ago. So of course economic relationships that are thousands of years old will not change over time. What the women there, in spite of all of this, are doing right now is in every single way a revolution.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was a critic that came in, but when we talk about Russia or anything, we have to talk about reality, and that's why it's important to get everything out.
Exactly.
And this question was a question I saw like a Danish woman. And also when I talk to my friends, I'm very enthusiastic about Russia, and I really like it, and I hope all the best for Russia. People say, how did this start? This was not a democratic choice. I said, well, somebody had to start something sometimes and give it a chance, because if not, nothing will happen ever. And it will be like the common meeting in Christiania, we cannot decide anything. Some people took an initiative, and it might not be democratic, there might not be a majority, but it's very good they do it, because if not, ISIS moving. And that's how life is. Some people would take an initiative to see how it is. I just wonder, and that's of course not a real problem, but over time, if people like it, okay, big success. What about if people don't like it? Will it be dictatorship, or will they give up? It's nice to ask it, because now everybody is so enthusiastic, but that's a real question.
other communities to make sure that this women's liberation is sustainable. And I think the mechanisms are slowly being established given these the conditions. And I mean, I didn't mean to say that you're not enthusiastic about it. I just was talking about the way we criticize. I think we totally need to criticize. And this actually was the last thing that Emine Osi, the woman I was talking about, said. The best thing you can do to us in terms of solidarity is criticizing us. This is actually what she said. And as I said earlier, it's not about imposing one thing. And actually, the way the parliament in Rojava is now run in Jizre Canton anyway is a coalition of several different parties. Actually, 16, 20 parties are. It's not PAYC.
Reality is that everything in Russia
I think
is now run by some very enthusiastic people.
I actually think that the discussion you're having is very interesting because you're coming with different perspectives and also different worldviews when you're approaching this issue. And I think what Nina is also maybe asking is, it's kind of interesting. I mean, what you have right now is all these, you see these strong women in the media, and and then you look into the Middle East and you see all these women with veils, and you think, is it actually possible that you have, a group of women who can actually stand out? And then you also ask yourself, okay, well, what will happen post-war? Let's say that the war is over, then what's going to happen? Are we going to fall back to these old patriarchal societies? Or are we going to go with the idea that started the war? So how is the future development going to be?
I would like to say just shortly
Yeah.
that women that are fighting now with weapons, they're not going back and if the man dominates them. I cannot believe this. That's not possible. They change forever. But, women fight with women, but I have never seen a man washing dishes in Kurdistan.
I saw them.
You have seen that?
My
Let
dad
me
was
out at the front lines where there are no women. But
all right, I think we're gonna move it.
But it takes time, and then it took 50 years with equality in the homes.
To all the panelists, really, I've learned a lot from you all. I would like to say that what is happening, going on in Rojava now is amazing. But in a way, it's impossible to predict what will happen in the future. We can just hope, we can work towards it, but we cannot know. But I think as long as we have the hope, as long as we have the capacity to go forwards, it's hopeful. The Rojava, the model, the democratic autonomy model, and the self-governance project that is going on needs to be recognized internationally. That is one thing for sure. And I want to ask you, perhaps you in the audience have some comments on that, or perhaps Lila and Anya also. The question about Turkey. All this time, at least since the summer, we have seen images of Turkish tanks along the border, a passive Turkey, and an international community who verbally at least attacked Turkey. And then we see that even if we had some hopes that perhaps the PKK, since they actually were fighting along with a coalition in Syria, in Kurdistan region in Iraq, that they would consider to delist the PKK from the terrorists. What we see is that in spite of all Turkey's disgraceful behavior all this time, they still support Turkey. And I think Turkey plays a key role here because there is a peace process going on. Okay, it's no longer only the PKK and Turkey versus Turkey. No, we have to see a peace process for the whole region. We have to include also what is going on in Rojava, what is going on or not going on in South Kurdish part of Iran. It's very important now to focus on what is also going on in Turkey. Yeah, I can stop there because I saw.
Yeah, the audience is getting eager to pose their questions. Yeah.
I think it's important, as you say, important to know. It's a turning point for the Kurdish society as women came and fight and had played big roles in their society. And as you say, Nina, they will not back to home to the kitchen after that. I'm sure about that. But you should see it in the political context. Look at the Kurdish peoples who live around them. They are surrounded by the conservative dictatorships, Turkish, Iraq, Syria, and Syria in Iraq. They live in that condition. The most important thing is to support them as a one nation who a little bit, there are some democratic elements in the Kurdistan, in Iraq, Kurdish part in the Iraq and Syria. And for us, it's important, and international society actually play key roles, not Turkey. International society can push the Turkish. And that's it. You should look at that and see all the positive, progressive things in the Kurdish society in that region.
Maybe when any of you has addressed, how does this division, how does this fit into the process of emancipation or like the feminist struggle? How should we understand this? That's my question.
Armies autonomously organized, they're not mixed, is that
My name is Mustafa. My question is mostly to Karina and Annie. How you will describe the different or common between the Western feminism and the Kurdish feminism? I know the context is different, time is different, and geography is different. But can you try to describe a little bit? Thank you.
Western feminism has a lot to learn from the current Kurdish feminism. Because what we see, for example, in Norway where I live, that the women's issues are linked to certain issues in society. While the Kurdish feminism, if you may call it that, is a more looking at the global issue, at what feminism is all over the world. Of course, there is a Kurdish feminism, and we see very well now in Warsaw what's going on. But it's not only for Warsaw, and that's what what attracts me very much. I find it very sympathetic because it's including. It's not excluding or looking at different fields or different layers of people, or it's like
It's a global approach.
it's global. It's humankind and feminism in this humankind. So I think actually we have a lot to learn, and I like the courage they have, because I think Western, we had it, like for example in the UK, there's suffragettes in the UK who are very, very strong activists, and I think we have lost some of that in the West. I think really, but the problem is that people don't see this. They look at as you also said, at the images on TV, and all these brave, pretty women fighting. They don't see the bigger cause they fight for. And I think that is something we have to convey to in our networks, that this is something that we should look to and really learn something from. Maybe you will, my co-panelists will add something.
I want to say something to your question of the separated organization of 1995 and up to 97, the women, most of them were not well educated and they were young. And everybody knew when they fight together in units with men, the men will be the commanders and the women they will not allow the women to fight, they will not allow the women to grow. And so they said, we want to organize it separately, so that men have to wash dishes, they have to wash clothes, and so on. And they learned it. In the beginning it was really hard when, for example, when we had military actions together and the men were cooking, you could not eat this, but after a while, so if your food was not good, you have to do it again the next day. That was the solution. And it's the same in Warsaw now. Women are not part of the social life and political life before. They were in the organization, but out of the organization they were not. And so we have the same now in Warsaw. But you have in Warsaw, you have the opportunity that most of the women are well educated. They studied and they know a lot of things. But again, it's an ideology to make women strong, to separate them. But they work together a lot, as you see. In the evening they go out together for the basic grassroots work. They go together from house to house. But they have their own organizations, and because they want to decide, it's a strategic thing that women should decide how society should develop. Because the Kurdish movement says 5,000 years we have the patriarchal system, and now the next 5,000 years we want to learn what women build up a society like, and that's the reason.
To add technical information, perhaps, the women are not obligated to join the separate YPG. So the YPG, first in 2012, towards the end, the People's Defense Forces, YPG, were established as a general force, and women and men, like the first pictures I saw of the Rojava Revolution in July of 2012 were women, actually. So it was first a general force, but then in 2013, in January, the women themselves decided to have an autonomous organization. But as Anya said, it has reasons in order to establish women-only spheres so that they can develop together, because they analyze that sometimes when men are nearby, there's some kind of competition or some kind of inadequacy going on, because it's, for many people, the first time the genders mix this way in such a traditional society. So sometimes it's deemed necessary, but they're completely equal, like weapons distribution, education, everything is the same. And in fact, gender equality, and Karian had mentioned how education is a central part of military training as well, political consciousness and education. Gender equality is being taught to all security forces, to the defense forces, as well as the internal security forces, the asayish. They have to, in the academy, they get separate gender equality training, sometimes separate, sometimes men get education directed towards them, sometimes the women, sometimes they do mixed discussions and so on. So it's very, it's not to be understood in terms of separating, but as women's autonomous organization.
But in general, me and my husband, we go around making a picture show about Kurdistan and very propaganding for it. We are very enthusiastic about it, and people like it. Kurds especially like it very much. And we also made a book before about Kurdistan. We make a new one, and this is very important for us, and I also think for the Kurdish people. But this is another panel where I think we should discuss honestly what is the problems of the Kurdish women. And of course, somebody has seen soldiers washing their own dishes, making their own food. This does soldiers all over the world, they must do it. When I say I have not seen a Kurdish man wash dishes, then it is in his home. But I'm sure it will come, it takes time.
Thanks for coming. It's very delightful to listen to you and your ideas, points, views. You spoke a lot about Rojava, the western part of Kurdistan, and we also heard about Rojava, the eastern part of Kurdistan. But I would like to hear about, PKK is also in the northern part, in the Turkish part of Kurdistan. And they have, of course, the same idea of Abdullah Öcalan as we see in Rojava. But normally, if you walk around in the northern part of Kurdistan, in the city of Kurdistan, you still see a lot of conservatism. And I've also seen this in my own family in the Van and Tubman areas. And there was like, when I'm washing the dishes and stuff, it's like, no, Sana, you're a boy. You're acting like a girl. So, yeah, I can see the ideology. And when do you think this conservatism will change in the society at all? Thank you very much.
And I want to respond as a Kurdish woman, not as whatever I'm here today. I think this is exactly this kind of contradiction, right? Being on one hand advocating very revolutionary principles, but then in reality, inside the families, it looks different, especially the fathers. Some of them have been to prison, and then they come home and beat their wives. So, for example, I'm the oldest of 3 girls, and when my youngest sister was born, maybe this is too much family information, when my youngest sister was born, and when we learned that she was going to be a girl, some members of my family, luckily not my parents, but some family members said, oh, it should have been a boy, and that just made, I was 11 at that time, that was like a little trauma at that time for me, because I was like, why? We are already 2 girls, what was wrong with us? Because I realized it was not about having some diversity, it was, if we had been boys, they probably wouldn't have said this has to be a girl, or are less likely to say. And in fact, I remember at that time, at such an age, people were saying to my father, you're kind of like not a full man if you don't have a boy, right? So this is just really disgusting. And I think this change that we wait for, and change not in terms of which dictator is running us, where do we live, which oppression, which rights do we not have, but this change inside the own community, the society we want to live in, this equality, this freedom we believe in, supposedly, that we should also live out, will start when men start to challenge their own privileges. I think, and women need to overcome their internalized slavery as well, because many women actually contribute to the oppression of other women by perpetuating patriarchy inside the family. So I think whenever men stand up also, like the case that Afshin mentioned, where the men were wearing Kurdish women's dresses, that's, for example, that kind of stuff, and not necessarily in the social media sphere, but in your immediate circles. Whenever men start standing up and say masculinity is not defined by how much I oppress women or how many dishes I wash or not wash, but I define myself as something different, I think that's when we will see social and internal change.
Answer would be with you. I mean, it starts with you, right? You're from the northern part of Kurdistan, right? I realize that you live here, but it starts with you. So do the dishes and tell them why you do the dishes. That's how it starts.
Alright, I actually have a question for the other minorities in the area that meet these Kurdish women. How do they react? Are they accepted? Are they respected? Or are they just looked frowned upon? And also by the Kurdish society itself.
What I learned at Rojava, we visited the Assyrian women. There's an Assyrian women's organization too in Derek, for example. We talked to them, and they said up to the beginning of the revolution, they saw themselves very developed because they are Christian and they wear no and things like this. Some of them worked as advocates or something like this, and so they saw themselves very developed, and the Kurdish woman backward. But now they see how the women themselves and what kind of problems they solve. And they try to organize the same way now. They also build up communes and things like this. And for example, they have also security forces, the Christians, the Assyrians. They are called Sutoro, but there are no women in them. And they say they have the same problems, for example, violence in the family. There's the same problems in the Christian society in Rojava too, but they don't talk about it. But in the Kurdish communities, you know everybody. For example, there's a commune with 500 people and they go from house to house and they know everybody. So they know who is beating his wife, they know who. And because they know it, they can invent in the problems. And this is what the Syrian woman, the Syrian woman and the Arabic woman are seeing. And so they try to organize in the same way. Many of them are fighting in Yepege and Yepege and in the Asaish, in the Kurdish Asaish, because there are no women in the Christian Asaish.
Okay, so it's kind of like an establishment of a sisterhood, so they're supporting each other?
Sorry?
So
They are supporting each other, they are part of the organizations of the democratic organization everywhere.
Questions? Audience?
Already. But it will be anyway, it's interesting to especially hear this from Dilara. I was recently reading that YPG statement saying that the three cantons will become one at a point. Is that the aim to do this, and how is that with the PKK's ideology?
That's a good question. Well, let's say the territory, the reason why these three cantons are not connected has a lot to do with the fact that this border is completely artificial. And in many ways, there's cross-border loyalties. It's, for example, the city of Kamsho and Nusaybin there, they were artificially divided back in the day when the Sykes-Picot agreement was done. So saying that these have to be united actually means we have to get rid of ISIS in between, because the aim is not to have this unitary Kurdish state-like something, but to liberate these areas from ISIS. Because, for example, due to the embargo, the people there told us that had, for example, Afrin Canton, which is more diverse in terms of fruits and vegetables, whereas Cizre is more into wheat, like the soil, the climate is different. They need to exchange with each other, and they need to get rid of these areas dividing them, not because of some Kurdish nationalism, but because this is ISIS that is dividing them. So they're constantly attacking. So when talking about Kurdish unity in general, or having some kind of central system, it's important to understand that coordination of the three cantons is like one coordination anyway, but they're three autonomous cantons, and they're in themselves, they're quite diverse. For example, Kobani is mostly Kurdish and mostly Sunni, whereas Cizre Canton is very, very diverse. There's many Arabs, Assyrians, etc. living there. So one reason for this autonomous organization was not just because they're geographically not connected, but also the diverse realities that are there. But in general, the principles underlining it and the social contract that was written is valid for all three cantons. So, and in terms of, for example, just talking about Kurdistan or mentioning it as in terms of like Western Kurdistan, was initially it just was adopted like that. Rojava, everyone was talking about Rojava because it was like specifically the Kurds in Syria that were rising up, so it was like a specific problem. But now more and more you hear people talking in terms of the cantons, for example, Kobani or Cizre. I think it's not incompatible with the idea of democratic confederalism, because confederalism means the togetherness of several federations. It means that regions will assess their local realities and organize autonomously. For example, there's different structures inside Turkey as well. not so much in the Iraqi part, because the idea of democratic confederalism is more specific to a certain political current. So local governance, and then on a larger level, like the coordination between these levels, and that not only includes the Kurdish nation, but also different ethnicities and so on. So when talking about the unification of the three cantons, I don't think this should be understood in terms of like Kurdish domination, but it's also the fight against ISIS, because had it not been for ISIS that is separating these areas, Serikani was almost completely destroyed, Kobani is completely destroyed. Had these three been connected, not so many people would have died, and also the economy would be more sustainable. I hope this answered your question.
Is in terms of sustainable communities, economies, equality, anti-hierarchical societies, we have Rojava, we have the Zapatistas in Mexico. Do you guys see any perspectives for anything like it anywhere else in the world? I guess what's our role as, for me, a bystander almost?
Some of the same organization as the PKK, for example. There are parallels, things that can be compared, and also to the educational issues. But I think the Rojava model, the direct democracy model, is also comparable. But I think they have proceeded, because in, no, I don't remember the area where the Zapatistas were, but I think the Rojava, the model in Rojava have proceeded compared to where the Zapatistas stopped, in a way. It's not over, but you know. But I think there are clear parallels between the two models. Is that right, Rodian? That there were some I don't know, cooperation, but also that the experiences of the Zapatistas were important to the PKK in a certain period, at least. We also see the same in the Tiger movement in Sri Lanka. There were some parallels. Now, there's a concrete model, a concrete area and I really try this out. And that's the amazing thing here, and we should really take care of it and stand together, like all Kurds and all POS stand together and try to embrace it in a way and help it support it forwards.
So even though I said that we were just about to end, I actually got a message saying that we have a female fighter from the YPG who would like to tell us a couple of words over the phone. So she's gonna call us. So this is
Ja, men som sagt, altså, som også var inde på, at vi har faktisk en kvindelig kriger fra YPG, altså direkte fra Rojava, fordi vi synes, at dagen er deres dag, og så deres stemmer skal også høres. Der har vi fået en unik mulighed, der måtte vi gerne ringe til en af dem. Hun vil gerne sige et par ord på kurdisk, og så må jeg lige prøve at oversætte til dansk. Goddag, Nava.
Geçen gibi jüne peşendeki acı meyvecide em kompuna jüne hamiya bıraktı belki emnezrin ama emzanın kupaçek jüme jün hamu buhur ser eşeroja jiyaneki demokratik mi karşılıkın?
Spasibo. مجبوریم که برای بقدیم نواد از بجن زور سپاس تبلیغونه ده. Tamam, spas. Nu kan jeg i hvert fald oversætte til dansk, det er sådan. Hun i hvert fald hilser på vegne af kurdiske kvinder, altså fra Rojava, som i hvert fald udfører en kamp, ikke en kamp for kurderne, men det er en kamp for menneskeligheden, i hvert fald mod terrorbevægelsen IS. Og det er jo en kamp om demokrati, og så derfor kurdiske kvinder, de er i hvert fald nogle demokratiforkæmper. Ja, så måtte jeg afbryde, og jeg beklager selvfølgelig teknikken, altså man kunne ønske, at der var andre muligheder for at kunne gøre det, men jeg synes altså, den har en symbolisk betydning, at deres stemme også bliver hørt her, og vi er selvfølgelig stolte over, at der er også nogle kurdiske kvinder, der står og siger det samme her.
Og så er det egentlig også, I didn't know that they were that advanced when it came to technology, so now you know they also have mobile phones. I think we've reached an end. It's been a 3...
What she said was that she sends her revolutionary salutes to us here, and they fight on behalf of not only Kurdish women, but all womanhood, and they're fighting for democracy and a democratic spirit.
Not only for women, but for all people.
For all people.
So, so she says hello and says, I think her main point was that this is not a fight just for women, but a fight for the entire global community. So there's one very desperate woman.
Desperate because
I really want to ask a question.
I have a question as much as I'm from Syria, so I'm so much touched by the whole thing. I come from Homs, and we've been talking, me and you, about the whole. It's strange that now the focus is that woman that way, while we're talking about. It's so strange this. The way that this idea is really interesting about putting these women at the same time. You've been talking about that it's not nationalistic and stuff, but unfortunately we couldn't see any Syrian flag, anything reflecting that it's also part of the Syrian region. And I guess that was also part of the not acceptance in some cases. While here, for example, in Denmark, it's much easier for these different ethnicity to work together because they don't have that division. Another comment also, I would really, if you talk more about that, the whole violence in the area is reflecting on the violence against women specifically, because access to weapons is quite easy, men are dispersed, there's a huge violence in the area, which is that liberation reflects, and unfortunately the first victims are women. That's basically two comments.
Which Syrian flag? Because there's the regime's flag and there's the opposition's flag.
Yeah, but they told that they are revolutionary.
Yeah.
It was the revolutionary flag. Like, for example, here in Denmark, when the Syrians, despite their background, they go together, they actually use the revolutionary flag.
Yeah. The thing about the Rojava revolution was that they didn't want to be part of the Syrian opposition. They considered themselves, but then some fractions inside the opposition started to change, and it became clear that they would not, as Kurds, receive any specific representation. And I mean, when during the Geneva II conference, for example, there was the Arab-Sunni coalition, basically, and it was also picked up by some Western powers, and it wasn't representative of any of the Syrian people in general. So that's what I'm saying. So that's why the Kurds were also reluctant to fight under the flag of the Syrian revolutionary flag, because then the Syrian opposition, the FSA, was also became very, very fractured, and then some jihadists took over, and the people there were also disillusioned by the Syrian revolutionary flag. So that's why I think, but on the other hand, you can see, for example, the Syriacs having their own flags, their own representations, and so on. But I agree with you. It's, I mean, it is very Kurdish in character because it's in the mostly Kurdish-dominated regions, and this is also something that we have been criticizing the people in Rojava. If you want to be more inclusive, then red, yellow, and green may not be representative of all peoples there. So, and yeah, but I mean, in terms of Syrian revolutionary opposition, it's not the one that it was in the beginning. And
yeah, but it's not representative by that anyway. Like we're not talking about the opposition. We're talking about the people. I'm not gonna go into that discussion now, but
I was talking about the flag because the flag represents something, and
yeah,
what it represented did not necessarily represent
the flag.
It's
not about it. It could be pink flag. I don't care. It just represents that people went together on this. Like here, for example, they go all kind of flags together because the Assyrians has their own flag, the Kurdish has their own flag, but they also actually they carry because that flag it came before there was allocation or there was any other representative of the opposition. It's just like that. People thought that it represents the area of revolution. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna finish it here because I think that you don't have time, but it was about that, and I really wanted you to maybe at some point, at another time, talk about the whole violence, how it's reflecting on the whole women's situation. Thank you. So, 3 hours and 18 minutes, and it seems like we can go on forever. So I think some of the things that we can take home with us today is that the entire Kurdish women's liberation movement is a very complex issue. And we will always have different views depending on who you ask. So it is a work in process. There is not just one solution. But I think what is important to remember in the middle of the chaos is that there is a hope for change. So it's going to be interesting to view the issue more closely in the upcoming time and to watch the struggle of the Kurdish women and see how their uprising is going to affect the region and even the world. Who knows, they might even serve as a model of inspiration. So I want to thank you very much and thank you for coming.